So many people say to me, why am I always going on about Israel? And why is Israel so important to you? To answer those kind of questions, I need to go back to the time when I was a child. It would have been in the 1950s when I first saw on TV those horrific scenes of the Holocaust. And I asked my parents, why didn't anybody in your generation do anything about it, to stop it? By the age of 14, I lost my father. I left school at 15 years of age and moved to London from my family home in the north of England in search of work. And by the time I was 16, I had my career in the music business with famous pop groups and with the creme de la creme, the Beatles management company, NEMS Enterprises, which belonged to Brian Epstein and Robert Stigwood, who at that time had just signed the Bee Gees. Even with all this air of fame and fortune, it was empty to me. As Solomon said, all is vanity, like chasing after the wind. Around this time in my life, 21 years of age, I'd already begun to be disillusioned with life. I started reading the Bible and was particularly enamoured with the words of King Solomon. I related to much of Solomon's words of wisdom, although they be a bit melancholy at times. I also started to learn about the history of Israel, reading from Christians call the Old Testament. It was like reading a history book, his story, for this is not man's account of the history of Israel, but God's story. My eyes of understanding began to be opened, and it was so clear to me, firstly, that the land of Israel was given to the descendants of Isaac and Jacob, and not to the descendants of Ishmael. Two distinct people groups, although blood related. Today we would see these two people groups as Jew and Arab. So I began to understand why the turmoil in the Middle East. I thought to myself, this is never going to be settled by man alone, and it will not be settled unless there is a recognition of the inherent rights of the Jewish people to live in their God-given land, Israel. Once I had completely read the Old Testament, I eventually arrived at the New Testament, where I had a revelation when reading the words of the Apostle Paul, first recorded, I would say, around about mid-1st century. Apostle Paul, a most wise and learned man, who when writing to the believers in Rome, where he posed a question in Romans chapter 11, did God reject the Jews? Never, was his reply. And alongside other profound comments which this Jewish believer mentions in the book of Romans chapter 11, Paul spoke directly and firmly to the Gentiles who had become followers of Jesus of Nazareth by very much rebuking them because of their ignorance and arrogance. For some of these Gentile Christians were basically thinking that they had somehow superseded the Jews. I was astonished when I first read Romans chapter 11, and I tried to share this same revelation with my church at that time, who basically told me to get lost. So I did. This led to me making arrangements to drive to Israel on my own in a little VW van, where I worked on a kibbutz, Kfar Blum, in the Upper Galilee. This was to be, and still is, one of the highlights of my life. Well, having come from the UK where I had a very nice lifestyle, thank you very much, but that was all vanity, as Solomon said. And for living on the kibbutz was such a simple and uncluttered lifestyle, just a bed in a room and food for the day. Getting up at the crack of dawn to start a day's work, picking apples or cotton. I recall being paid around $4 a month, I think it was, for my labour. Wow. You don't do this for the money, but out of love and commitment to Israel. I spent a total of 3 months in Israel, travelling from the north, Kiryat Shmona, to Ras Mohammed in the Sinai Desert, and trying to meet as many Jewish people along the way as I possibly could. The day I left Israel in October 1979 was one of the saddest days of my life. As I drove my little van into Haifa port to start my journey home to London via Athens, I wept. I did not want to leave. Since that time in 1979, I've been to Israel numerous times, probably as many as 20 times. I can recall clearly when God gave me the privilege of starting Revelation TV, and it was one day during a live TV show that I said on air, "Who wants to come to Israel with me?" Immediately, inquiries started to come into the office. And it was Tim Vince who began to organise everything for our first tour group to Israel. For I was far too busy trying to keep the wheels of Revelation TV turning, and I was oblivious to how the numbers were growing of those coming with us. Imagine this. When I turned up at the airport, I saw so many smiling faces, and I thought there must be someone famous behind me. So I looked behind me and I saw no one. And then I realised, to my amazement, that they were all looking at me. There were 720 dear folk all lining up to get on 3 planes. My, what a thrill that was, despite it being at the time of the Second Intifada, for we all were still trusting that Israel was the safest place to be. And now, over the 15 years which Revelation TV has been broadcasting, thousands of our dear viewers have also been to Israel, for they too have also come to a more enlightened historical and biblical understanding of Israel and the Jewish people, which includes their right to live in their God-given land. Now, looking back at the time when I had no one to share my revelations with, I've been so blessed and privileged to have been given the opportunity to broadcast these vital truths to so many people. So I hope this answers the reasons why I go on about Israel all the time, and why the re-establishing of the State of Israel just had to come to pass. Look what God did for me and for you. He educated us. He enlightened us. So let us continue in this battle for truth, as Benjamin Netanyahu once said to me.
I just wanted to say that we acknowledge and deeply regret that what Christians have done over the last 2,000 years. But even in light of that, would you comment on the role that Christians are playing today in a positive way?
Well, I think what's happening here is a very positive thing. I think the work that Willem has been doing and all of you are doing in supporting the State of Israel, the rebirth of the Jewish people in their land, is the most positive declamation of faith in our common heritage that Christians and Jews can do together. So I think it's very important.
In order to continue in this positive role, which I'm very eager to see and participate in myself personally, what would you say to encourage us to look to the future, and perhaps in a way that we can continue to help? Is there a new way perhaps?
Well, I think it's spreading the truth about Israel as opposed to the many falsehoods that are leveled against it. You spoke about the evils of the last 2,000 years. Those evils were made possible because of defamation, because of vilification, because of the lies that were spread about the Jewish people. And always, physical brutality was preceded by a web of lies. I think that working the other way, building a bastion of truth about Israel and the Jewish people and the Jewish state, is the greatest corrective of that. And fortunately today we have a Jewish state, and we have many Jewish and many non-Jewish friends that can fight the battle of truth, which I believe is the most important battle for the future of the State of Israel.
Thank you very much. I agree with you entirely with that.
I appreciate it.
Well, what Netanyahu said to me some 20 years ago, establish the truth about Israel and combat the web of lies, has emboldened me to do just that alongside my small Gideon's Army team. And, by the grace and favour of God, may Revelation TV continue to do just that. Thank you for letting me share this precious story.